you ever looked at someone you admired, a friend, a teacher, a leader, and thought they could never do something cruel? Not them. And yet, history, psychology, and even our own lives tell us a different story. Today, we begin a journey into the unsettling truth about human nature, a truth many would rather ignore. What causes a kind, ethical, loving person to become a monster? Is evil something we're born with? Or is it something we're shaped into, slowly, subtly, by the world around us? This question has haunted philosophers for centuries. It's disturbed psychologists in their quiet offices, and it's echoed through courtrooms, war zones, and families shattered by betrayal. This is not a story about others. This is a story about us, about the darkness that lives in the heart of every human being, and what it takes to confront it. In this first chapter, we pull back the curtain on what psychologists call the Lucifer effect, a term coined by Dr. Philip Zimbardo. It's the idea that ordinary people, yes, even those who seem kind, generous, and morally upright, can be transformed into agents of cruelty under certain conditions. The name comes from Lucifer, the fallen angel, once the brightest, now the most damned. And it asks a terrifying question. Could the fall from grace happen to you? Let's start with a question you may not want to answer. Have you ever done something that made you feel ashamed? Maybe it was small. Maybe you laughed when someone else was being bullied. Maybe you looked the other way when you saw something that was wrong. Maybe you followed a rule you knew was harmful because it was easier than resisting. Now ask yourself this. What if the stakes were higher? What if someone in authority ordered you to hurt another person? What if everyone around you agreed that it was justified? What if the person you were hurting was seen as an outsider or a threat? Would you still say no? In the 1960s, a psychologist named Stanley Milgram ran an experiment to explore this exact question. Participants were told to deliver electric shocks to another person whenever they answered a question incorrectly. The shocks weren't real, but the participants didn't know that. They believed they were causing pain, intense, screaming, begging pain, and most of them kept going. Why? Because someone in a lab coat told them to. That's it. A simple instruction from an authority figure, and ordinary people became agents of torment. This wasn't a horror movie. It was real, and it wasn't just a one-time occurrence. A few years later, Zimbardo ran a now infamous study, the Stanford Prison Experiment. He took a group of healthy, normal college students and randomly assigned them to play guards and prisoners. What happened next stunned the world. The guards, given uniforms and sunglasses, began to abuse their power. They humiliated the prisoners. They enforced arbitrary punishments. They became cruel. Fast. So fast, in fact, that the experiment had to be shut down after just 6 days. These weren't evil people. They were students, young men who had no history of violence. Some were pre-med, some were psychology majors, some wanted to change the world for the better. So what happened? They stepped into a role, a system, a context that rewarded control and normalized suffering. And once they were inside that system, their values evaporated. This is where our journey begins. Because what Milgram and Zimbardo exposed is not just about experiments. It's about human nature, about your nature. In the right, or perhaps the wrong, circumstances, any one of us can become the villain of someone else's story. This doesn't mean we're doomed, but it does mean we must be vigilant. Because evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like a friend who goes along with something they know is wrong. A manager who enforces an unjust rule without question. a soldier who follows orders they don't understand, a citizen who stays silent. But there's something even more important than fear in this realization. It's the awareness that if we can be corrupted, then we also have the power to resist. The battle between good and evil is not out there. It's inside us, every day, every moment, in every choice we make. In this series, we will uncover the hidden psychological forces that drive human cruelty. We'll explore concepts like dehumanization, moral disengagement, groupthink, and social conformity. We'll study history's darkest chapters and shine a light on the people who stood against them. And most importantly, we'll uncover how to build the strength to resist the darkness when it tries to rise in you. Because the only way to defeat the monster within is to face it. In the last part, we opened a door into the human psyche, where we confronted a difficult truth, that within every one of us lies the capacity for darkness, that ordinary people, under the right conditions, can be transformed into perpetrators of cruelty. Now we ask the next question: how? How do good people like you, people like me, end up doing things they once believed were unthinkable? One answer lies in a single, chilling word: authority. It's easy to believe that we control our own behavior, that if someone asked us to harm another person, we'd refuse, that our conscience would rise up and stop us. But history and science tell a different story. Let's return to 1961, Yale University. Stanley Milgram, a quiet, unassuming psychologist, had just begun an experiment that would rattle the conscience of the world. Volunteers were told they were part of a study on learning and memory. They were assigned the role of a teacher, while another person, an actor, played the learner. The teacher's job? Administer an electric shock every time the learner gave a wrong answer, each shock increasing in intensity. The learner, hidden behind a wall, began to scream. Cries of pain, pounding on the wall, pleading for the experiment to stop. Eventually, silence. But the man in the white lab coat, stern, composed, professional, simply said, "Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue." And so, most people did. Over 65% of participants went all the way to the maximum voltage, fully believing they had seriously harmed another human being. Why? Because a man in a lab coat told them to. Milgram's conclusion was disturbing, but undeniable. Ordinary people will inflict suffering, sometimes extreme, when directed by an authority figure. And not because they're sadistic, not because they want to hurt someone, but because they feel obligated, because they believe someone else is responsible, because saying no to authority feels harder than saying yes to cruelty. This isn't just about lab experiments. It's about every institution we inhabit: governments, corporations, schools, religious organizations. We're taught from a young age to respect authority, to listen, to follow rules, to not question the system. That obedience can bring order, structure, and progress. But left unchecked, it becomes dangerous. Think of the Nuremberg trials after World War II. Nazi officers, men who had participated in the Holocaust, stood in court and said the same chilling words: "I was just following orders." It wasn't just a defense. For many of them, it was the truth. They weren't monsters in the traditional sense. They were bureaucrats, soldiers, neighbors, and the machinery of authority turned their obedience into atrocity. Let's pause. Ask yourself this: who are the authority figures in your life? Who do you obey without question? A boss, a political leader, a spiritual guide, a social trend? Have you ever compromised your values because someone in power told you it was necessary? Have you ever stayed silent because someone else said, This isn't your business? The truth is, we are all vulnerable to this dynamic. Obedience feels safe. It removes the burden of responsibility. It gives us someone to blame if things go wrong. But here's the hard truth. Delegating your morality doesn't protect you. It erodes you. Because every time you follow a harmful order without protest, your conscience becomes a little quieter, and your soul a little more numb. But you are not powerless. The key is awareness. Recognizing the subtle cues of coercion. Understanding that even in the most rigid systems, you still have a choice. You can ask questions. You can challenge. You can refuse. And when you do, something incredible happens. You become a force of resistance. A single person saying no in a room full of silent compliance can ignite change, can awaken others, can break the chain. Let's talk about moral courage. It doesn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes it's a quiet refusal. A voice that says, "I won't do this," even when everyone else does. Think of whistleblowers, people who risk everything to expose corruption. They're not heroes because they're fearless. They're heroes because they acted even while afraid. The next time you find yourself in a situation where an authority asks you to cross a line, remember this: you are still responsible. Your actions are still your own, and you decide what kind of person you are becoming. No uniform, no title, no leader can absolve you of that. In this world, we need fewer followers, and more individuals who choose conscience over comfort, integrity over obedience. Because authority alone doesn't corrupt us. Our surrender to it does. In the next part of our journey, we'll uncover the second powerful force behind the transformation of good people into perpetrators of harm: dehumanization. Stay with me. What you're about to hear may change the way you see others and yourself forever. There is a moment when someone stops being a person in your eyes, when they become a label, an enemy, a threat, a thing. And in that moment, your empathy fades, your moral compass shifts, and acts that once seemed unthinkable start to feel justified. That moment is called dehumanization. Dehumanization is one of the most powerful psychological tools ever discovered, not because it makes us evil, but because it allows us to do evil without realizing it. When we stop seeing others as fully human, we stop feeling responsible for their suffering. It's how cruelty hides in plain sight. Let's begin with a question that cuts deep. Have you ever used a label instead of a name? Called someone a loser, a criminal, illegal, vermin, enemy, or even just them? It may seem harmless, but that language has consequences. It creates emotional distance. It makes it easier to say, they deserved it. They're not like us. They don't matter as much. This isn't just rhetoric. It's the gateway to dehumanization. Throughout history, the most horrifying atrocities have been preceded by a single act: stripping people of their humanity. Before the Holocaust, Nazi propaganda referred to Jewish people as rats. Before the Rwandan genocide, Tutsis were called cockroaches. During slavery in the Americas, black people were described as subhuman, inferior, animalistic. In wartime, enemies are often described as targets, collateral, or hostiles. These aren't just words, they're weapons. When someone becomes a category instead of a person, it becomes easier to look away, to justify violence, to ignore suffering. And it doesn't just happen on battlefields or in dictatorships. It happens everywhere, subtly, insidiously. In schools where bullies target the weird kid. In offices where employees gossip about the outsider. On social media, where outrage and ridicule spread like wildfire aimed at people we've never met. Every time we reduce someone to a label, we chip away at their humanity, and ours. But why do we do it? Why would ordinary people, often good people, willingly dehumanize others? The answer lies in fear, in conformity, and in control. Fear makes us want to separate ourselves from anything that threatens us. If someone looks different, believes different, acts different, it's easier to label them than to understand them. Conformity pulls us toward our group, our tribe, and away from anyone who isn't one of us. It creates a line, us versus them. And once that line is drawn, empathy doesn't cross it easily. And control, that's the darkest layer. Because when we dehumanize others, we give ourselves permission to dominate them, to exploit, ignore, punish, or even destroy without guilt. This is the foundation of systemic oppression. This is how empires justify conquest, how prisons become cages of abuse, how abuse within families or communities goes unchecked. Because victims are told they are overreacting, broken, less than. But there is another path. Empathy. The antidote to dehumanization isn't complexity, it's connection. The moment you take time to listen to someone's story, to hear their pain, to see their face, to understand their perspective, you restore their humanity. And something even more powerful happens. You reclaim your own. Let me share a story. During the height of apartheid in South Africa, a white guard in a prison was assigned to watch over political prisoners, one of whom was Nelson Mandela. At first, the guard viewed Mandela as a dangerous radical, just another inmate, a number, a threat to the system. But Mandela didn't respond with hatred. He spoke with respect. He listened. He asked questions. Over time, something changed. The guard saw not a number, but a man, not a threat, but a father, a thinker, a human being. By the end of Mandela's sentence, that same guard stood at his release, crying, not because of guilt, but because of transformation. It is easy to hate what we don't understand, but it is impossible to hate someone you've truly come to know. That's why art, storytelling, film, music, all forms of human expression can dismantle hate, because they force us to see each other again. So here is the challenge. The next time you're tempted to dehumanize, to label someone, to mock, dismiss, or write them off, pause and ask yourself, what's their story? What pain are they carrying? What would I see if I truly looked? Because every person you meet is fighting a battle you cannot see. And every act of dehumanization you resist is a step back toward compassion. This isn't weakness. It's the greatest strength of all. To choose understanding over judgment, curiosity over condemnation, connection over fear. In the next part of our journey, we'll explore what happens when group dynamics take over, when the individual dissolves into the crowd, and morality becomes a performance shaped by the system itself. So far, we've explored the disturbing power of obedience and the emotional armor of dehumanization. Now, we peel back another layer of the human psyche, one where identity becomes fluid, where we slip into roles without knowing it, and the group, the crowd, begins to dictate who we are. Welcome to the psychology of the mob, where individuals disappear into a collective mask. It begins subtly. A crowd gathers. A cause is shared. Anger builds. Emotion spreads. And suddenly, you're not just you anymore. You are part of something. A group, a tribe, a movement. And in that group, you feel less alone, less responsible, less afraid. That's the seductive power of group identity. It gives us certainty, belonging, purpose. But it can also give us permission to surrender our ethics, our conscience, our self. Let's revisit one of the most disturbing psychological studies in history. A study that didn't just reveal something, it unleashed something. The Stanford Prison Experiment. Stanford University. Psychologist Philip Zimbardo created a simulated prison in the basement of the psychology building. He randomly assigned participants to two roles: guards and prisoners. They were all ordinary young men. No history of violence, no psychiatric concerns, no real prison experience, just students, volunteers, everyday people. What happened next shocked the world. Within hours, the guards began asserting dominance. Within days, they escalated. Insults, sleep deprivation, psychological torment, even physical aggression. The prisoners broke down. Some rebelled. Others collapsed into submission, crying or begging to leave. And Zimbardo, he let it continue. Until a graduate student, one of the few people not caught in the illusion, insisted it be stopped. The entire experiment lasted only 6 days, but it left a permanent scar on psychology. Why did it go so far? Because the participants weren't acting as individuals anymore. They had absorbed the role: guard, prisoner, oppressor, victim. The system created the stage, the uniforms, the rules, the power imbalance, and the script was followed even without direction. What the Stanford Prison Experiment teaches us is this: we are more influenced by context than we think. Put a good person in a corrupt system, and the system often wins. Because systems shape behavior. They define what's normal. They dictate what is rewarded and what is punished. If cruelty becomes policy, it feels justified. If silence becomes safety, it feels wise. If dehumanization becomes common, it feels natural. But here's the truth. Systems are made up of individuals, and that means they can be changed by individuals who refuse to conform. This isn't just theory. We see it every day. In schools where bullying goes unchecked because that's just how it is. In workplaces where harassment hides behind corporate silence. In police forces where the blue wall protects wrongdoing. In governments where groupthink drowns dissenting voices. But we also see the antidote. The one employee who speaks up. The student who refuses to laugh at cruelty. The officer who blows the whistle. The citizen who refuses to cheer with the crowd. These people break the spell. They remove the mask. They remind us of what it means to be human again. Because when you stop performing the role, you start reclaiming your integrity. It's easy to say, I was just playing my part. It's harder to say, that part wasn't me. But that's the first step toward liberation. Here's the question. What roles are you playing without realizing it? Are you acting like the boss, the follower, the rebel, the victim, not because it's who you are, but because it's what the group expects? Are you being true to your values or just fitting into the system? The crowd can be comforting, but it's also where conscience gets quiet, where individual responsibility fades into collective excuses. And the moment we stop thinking for ourselves, we become capable of things we never imagined. But here's the power you hold. You can step out of the role. You can refuse the costume. You can be the person in the system who says, no, this is wrong, I will not play along. And when you do that, you give others permission to do the same. Courage is contagious. So is clarity. So is conscience. In the next chapter of this journey, we dive into the mechanisms of moral disengagement, how we rationalize harm, numb our guilt, and tell ourselves that we're still good, even when our actions say otherwise. It's a darker turn, but a necessary one. Because only when we understand how we justify evil can we begin to resist it. There's a voice in your head. You hear it when you've done something that doesn't sit right. A voice that whispers, it wasn't that bad. You had no choice. everyone else would have done the same. That voice is moral disengagement, and it's one of the most powerful forces behind everyday evil. Because most people don't wake up and say, "Today, I will cause harm." They wake up and say, "I'm a good person." And they believe it, even when their actions say otherwise. So how does this happen? How do good people commit harmful acts and still sleep at night? It begins with the art of self-deception. Psychologist Albert Bandura called it moral disengagement, the process by which we disconnect our actions from our values. We trick our minds into thinking that wrong is right, or at least not really wrong, and the methods we use are as old as humanity itself. Let's walk through them. 1. Moral justification. I did it for a good reason. Torture becomes national security. Lying becomes protecting someone's feelings. Aggression becomes defending the family. Entire wars are launched under the banner of freedom, God, or righteousness. We rewrite the story until harm looks like heroism. 2. Euphemistic language. It's not violence, it's enhanced interrogation. It's not killing, it's neutralizing a threat. We soften words to soften guilt. The military does it. Corporations do it. We do it. Every time we say, "I didn't cheat, I just bent the rules," or "It's not gossip, it's venting," language becomes camouflage. It hides the truth from our conscience. 3. Displacement of responsibility. I was just following orders. We shift blame to authority, to bosses, to systems, to policies, to culture. The more we say, "It wasn't my call," the less we feel responsible, even when we pulled the trigger. 4. Diffusion of responsibility. Everyone else was doing it. If I didn't, someone else would have. In a crowd, guilt gets diluted. When no one feels fully accountable, anything becomes possible. This is how mobs form, how online hate spreads, how office cultures become toxic. No one takes the blame, so the damage grows. 5. Dehumanization. We've already seen this one. Once someone is labeled as less than human, a criminal, a parasite, a threat, our conscience gives us permission to look away. Empathy shuts down. And once that happens, even cruelty can feel righteous. 6. Blaming the victim. They had it coming. If they didn't act like that, I wouldn't have responded that way. Victims become responsible for their own suffering. We see this in abuse cases, in discrimination, in war, in poverty. It lets us walk past the wounded and still call ourselves good. These mechanisms don't just operate in others, they operate in us every day. When we snap at someone and justify it because we were tired, when we dismiss another's pain because they're too sensitive, when we hide behind silence because speaking out would be too risky, we rationalize. And in those moments, our self-image stays intact, but our integrity slips away. Here's the hard truth. The more we lie to ourselves, the easier it becomes to harm others. And the scariest part, we don't even realize it's happening. But here's where hope lives. Because the opposite of moral disengagement is moral awareness. And it starts with one powerful question. What story am I telling myself to avoid feeling wrong? Ask yourself, am I using a euphemism to make this easier? Am I blaming someone else to avoid responsibility? Am I minimizing harm to protect my ego? These questions are not comfortable. They're not meant to be. They are meant to wake us up, to pull us out of self-deception, to bring us back to who we really are. Because here's the truth. You can make mistakes. You can hurt people. You can even participate in systems that cause harm and still be redeemable if you're willing to face it. to own it, to change. Accountability isn't about shame. It's about growth. It's about stepping out of denial and into transformation. Imagine a world where people took real responsibility for the pain they caused, not to punish themselves, but to make it right. Imagine if our leaders, our neighbors, ourselves, stopped hiding behind excuses and started listening, learning, changing. That world begins with you, with the stories you choose to believe, with the lies you refuse to tell yourself. In the final part of this journey, we'll ask the most important question of all. Now that we understand how darkness grows, what can we do to resist it? How do we live awake, moral, aware, brave? This is where knowledge becomes action, and where you decide who you're going to be. We've reached the final chapter. You've walked with us through the hidden chambers of human behavior, through obedience and conformity, through masks and roles, through silence, deception, and the subtle tricks of the mind. You've seen how easy it is for good people to become complicit, to drift into darkness, not with malice, but with denial, with fear, with stories that feel safe. And now, the question stands before you like a mirror. What kind of person will you choose to be when the world begins to lose its way? This is the moment where we shift from awareness to action, from understanding evil to resisting it. Because knowledge is not enough. If it doesn't change us, if it doesn't move us, then we've simply observed the storm, without choosing shelter, or better, without choosing to become the light. Let's be clear. Resisting darkness is not about being perfect. It's about being awake, intentional, courageous, accountable, and more than anything, it's about the small, daily choices that build a life of integrity. Let's break it down. 1. Know thyself. Radical self-honesty. The first resistance begins within. Before you can challenge the world, you must challenge your own delusions, your own biases, your own temptations to moral disengagement. Ask yourself, what lies do I tell myself to stay comfortable? What harm do I ignore because it's inconvenient to face? Who do I become when I feel powerless? Self-awareness is not passive. It's active, it's humbling, it's the foundation of all change. Without it, you're a puppet to your own unconscious justifications. With it, you become a force no darkness can manipulate. 2. Refuse the mask. Live authentically. In a world that pressures you to conform, to play a role, to wear the mask of normal, resistance looks like authenticity. Speak your truth, even if your voice shakes. Walk away from a crowd headed in the wrong direction. Be kind in a room full of cynicism. Be ethical when no one is watching. You don't need a spotlight to be a leader. You just need the courage to be yourself. 3. Break the spell. Interrupt harm. Early darkness doesn't usually begin with violence. It begins with silence, with excuses, with awkward glances, with shrugged shoulders. So, interrupt it. When someone dehumanizes, speak up. When a friend jokes about something cruel, challenge it. When your workplace tolerates injustice, question it. You don't have to fix everything, but you must refuse to be another bystander in a world that needs voices. Your silence may feel safe, but your silence is also seen, and others are watching, hoping someone else will go first. Be that someone. 4. Practice moral courage, even when it costs you. The truth? Courage is not comfortable. Real resistance sometimes means losing friends, disappointing family, risking your job, standing alone. But ask yourself this: what is the cost of staying silent? What is the cost of becoming numb? What is the cost of a life spent avoiding discomfort while others suffer? At the end of your life, what will matter more? Comfort or character? Choose character over and over again. 5. Connect with others. Build micro-resistance. You are not alone. There are others, scattered across this noisy, chaotic world, who feel what you feel, who see what you see, who care like you care. Find them. Build with them, not just on a global scale, but in your street, your school, your workspace. Resistance doesn't always look like protests and petitions. Sometimes it looks like a lunch table where no one is bullied, a classroom where every voice is heard, a meeting where someone says, "That's not okay," a relationship where accountability is love. Micro-resistance creates macro change, and it starts with you. 6. Live with legacy in mind. Choose the long view. When the world tries to pull you into short-term wins, ego games, tribal loyalty, resist. Ask yourself, what kind of ancestor do I want to be? What kind of world do I want to leave behind? Because every action you take, every word, every silence, every stand, echoes into your future, into someone else's present, into a culture that is shaped by your choices. Live in a way that your great-grandchildren would be proud of, not just impressed by. Here's what it all comes down to. Evil is not always loud. Often it whispers, and so must your response. You don't have to be a hero. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be awake, honest, brave enough to say, "Not this time, not in my name, not while I'm here." That is how you resist, not once, but every day, in every small choice to stay human, to stay kind, to stay free. So, as we close this journey, know this: the dark side of good people will always exist, but so will the light. And the choice between them, it isn't made once, it's made over and over and over again. With every moment, with every voice, with every quiet act of conscience. The world needs that from you, now more than ever. And you are not alone in the fight. You are part of the resistance.